I was getting ready to prepare this year, and I was planning on going back to return to our usual topic of tefillah. I couldn't get myself to do it. I said, we have Shavuot coming up, and I felt that with a few days left to Shavuot, it was hard for me, and I felt like it was just important that we try to learn something connected to Shavuot. So you'll forgive me if you, I hope this isn't going to be Shavuot overload. I hope not all the teachers will do the same thing, but I'd like to think that at least the topic that we're going to be doing is a little bit different than what you'll be doing with other teachers. So I just felt like with Shavuot coming up, it's important for us to prepare for Shavuot, and Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we will continue and get back to our regular curriculum of tefillah. So just a throughout a question. When, we'll play a short game, very quick. When I say the name of a chag, I want you to just shout out what immediately comes to mind when I say that chag. So for example, Shavuot. A cheesecake, okay, good. Let's start with Sukkot. Sukkot, what comes to mind with Sukkot? Arba minim. Sukkah, Hanukkah. Candles, Neiros Hanukkah, Purim. Hamintashin, good, okay, what else? Megillah, okay. What about Rosh Hashanah? Shofar, excellent. Now, Shavuot, what did you all say? Cheesecake and? Bikurim? Torah, okay. Now what's interesting, if you paid attention, and I meant to do Shavuot at the end, I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, is that for all the other chagim, when I asked you to word associate, pretty much all of you associated or shouted out a mitzvah, an actual mitzvah midoraisa, or midrabanan if we're talking about Hanukkah or Purim, that applies to that day. Okay, so many of you mentioned shofar on Rosh Hashanah. You mentioned candle lighting on Hanukkah. You mentioned dalad minim on Sukkot, or you mentioned sukkah on Sukkot. You mentioned nerod on Hanukkah. So, yeah, when it comes to Shavuot, the associations we had were cheesecake, which is also very, very important. We also had Matan Torah, which, as we know, is also not written in the Torah. In fact, one of the strange aspects of Shavuot is that there are no mitzvot written in the Torah. One of you mentioned Bikurim, which is mentioned in the Torah, not as a mitzvah for us to do, but it's something that was brought around the time of Shavuot. But if you look at the psukim, there is what is lacking on Shavuot more than anything else makes no mention of any mitzvah. And therefore, what has come to define Shavuot more than anything else are Minhagim. All other chagim, there are also minhagim, right? We have apple and honey on Rosh Hashanah, and we have latkes on Chanukah. Every chag has minhagim, or has things that we do. Yet when we think about them, usually our general association is going to be the mitzvah that is associated with that chag. When it comes to Shavuot, almost our entire association is the minhagim of Shavuot. And I'd like to try to answer that question. Why is that? Why is it that Shavuot, specifically our association, is there a reason why specifically, meaning why is there no mitzvah on Shavuot, no mitzvah d'oraisa, such that what has become our basic association with Shavuot is basically all the minhagim of Shavuot? I'd like to kind of pack that question, put that to the side, and hopefully Be'ezrat Hashem we'll get to that by the end. We'll develop what I believe to be an interesting perspective as to why that is the case. What I'd like to do now for the next little while is go through the various minhagim, and there are numerous, and try to understand where they come from. To go through each of the minhagim, if we'll have time, each of them, if not only some of them, and to understand, some of them have more reasons than others that are given, to try to better understand why we do the things that we do specifically on Shavuot, because we associate it with learning Torah, receiving the Torah, staying up all night. We have eating dairy on Shavuot. We have the idea of many shuls adorn the shul with greenery, with flowers on Shavuot. There's the idea, our favorite part of Shavuot is right before Torah begins, when we say the akdamot. I'm just kidding, that was facetious. Especially those of us who stay up all night, and then all of a sudden you get to the Torah reading, and it becomes even longer than usual. Right? There are numerous minhagim that we have on Shavuot, and I'd like to together explore the basis for those various minhagim, and I hope that by the end we'll also come to an understanding as to why minhagim are particularly dominant on Shavuot. So the first minhag I'd like to explore with you is what's known as Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Tikkun Leil Shavuot is the minhag to basically stay up all night, or at least spend a significant part of Shavuot learning on Shavuot night. Now, the earliest source for this idea seems to be the Zohar. Okay, now, I am not someone who is prolific in Zohar, but we will share a little bit of Zohar together today, where the Zohar describes historically how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would stay up all night, the night of Shavuot, learning Torah. We'll read a little bit of it. It's written in Aramaic. It's a little harder to understand, but we'll read a little bit together. Source number 1. Rabbi Shimon have yasiv v'la'i be'oraisa. Rabbi Shimon would sit and he would involve himself in oraisa. Oraisa is Torah, in the study of Torah. Belelia dikala ischabaret bevala. On the night the night before, that usually a kala is about to meet her husband. What does a kala do the night before she meets her husband, or at least getting up very, very early in the morning before she adorns herself. She wakes up very early in the morning. From all my memories, I don't know about my wedding, what time my wife got up, but I know all the weddings that we've ever had in the family since then, the women always have to get up much earlier because they got to get their hair done, they got to get their makeup done, they got to get everything done. It takes a long time to prepare properly for the wedding. And the same thing that is how a kala prepares for the wedding. So says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the minhag is for us to stay up all night, adorning ourselves with the Torah, as it were. Ditaninan, as we learn, kol inan chavraya de b'nei hechala de kala, itstrichu ba'hilalia de kala is idadamat, idadmanat lemehevi liyoma achra go chupa bevala. Again, I'm not going to translate every single word, but this basic understanding is that the whole group that is together with the kala was involved in preparing the kala, preparing the bride for the evening, for the time when she was going to meet her husband. And therefore, what do? We are, as it were, approaching the day when we're going to get married, kiviyachol, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what do we adorn ourselves with? We adorn ourselves with the study of Torah. We prepare by investing and involving ourselves in the study of Torah. If you go to the underlined part now, ulemechde ima bitikuna dei it's kanat lemali. So what do we do? What do we study? And the Zohar actually specifies what types of Torah we involved ourselves with as a way of preparing for Matan Torah. We would learn lamale be'oraisa mitorah, neviim, u'mineviim lechtuvim, uvimidrashot. We would learn Torah, Navi, Ktuvim, Medrash, Dikrai, Ubarze, Dechachmasa, Ubaraze, and the secrets of the Torah. And so the Zohar describes this process of basically adorning ourselves with all the wonders of the Torah and all different aspects of the Torah, from all of Tanakh to what we would call Kabbalah, to all different aspects of the Torah. And that was the process that the Zohar describes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai going through. And this is the source for the idea of staying up all night and basically involving ourselves in learning Torah. If you look at source number 2, the Shla HaKadosh outlines this as well, and he gives more direct explanation for what was learned, what is meant to be learned. If you look at source number 2 in section Gimel, B'layla hahu shel Chag Shavuot, on the night of Chag Shavuot, Yidud Hashena, Mikol mi sherotzeh lidabek b'kedusha. Anyone who would like to achieve a certain level of holiness, he should prevent himself from sleeping. You should stay up all night. V'yasok b'Torah kol halayla. And you should involve yourself in learning Torah the whole night. What should you learn? So he continues in Hey, Hacharedim lidvar Hashem, those who are very interested in being strict about following the words of the Torah, or the words of Hashem, Yishtadlu shiyeh minyan biyachad. You should gather together. You should have a minyan of people grouped together. The akol be'asara shchin asharya. Why 10? Because as we learn, those of you who have been coming to our classes, we know that whenever there are 10 people who come together involved in either learning, Torah study, or davening, that the Shekhinah descends upon them. So it's best, says the Shla, for everyone to sit and learn together. Tzarich lilmod chelek, this is very ambitious, look at this. You have to learn chelek mitorah, neviim, ksuvim, shisha sedarim, sefer yetzira, zohar, taryag mitzvot. You basically got to learn kol haTorah kula in one night. You got to learn Torah, Navi, Ksuvim, the 6 books of the Mishnah. Sefer Yetzirah is a Kabbalistic Sefer. You got to learn the Zohar. Basically, you got to learn everything. Now, how could you possibly learn everything at night? He goes on to describe that what you do is you don't actually read the entire Torah, but you read for every parsha the first 3 psukim at the beginning of the parsha, and you read the last 3 psukim at the end of the parsha. And then you do that for every single parsha, and then you continue on throughout the various parts of the Torah. Now, in fact, if anybody here is part of the more Edut Mizrach or Sephardic community, this is actually the minhag. They call it Tikkun Leil Shavuot. The Sephardic community all comes together. They have a special sefer, and they have a special book, and they sit there, and they basically sit there all night as a community. The first 3 psukim of Parshas Bereshis, the last 3 psukim of Parshas Bereshis, and literally going through the entire text. So this is a tradition that has continued until today. It's called Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and that's what that community does. But there is another approach to the idea of staying up all night. There's another source for it, and I believe it is the source for perhaps a different approach to this entire event. And that is source number 3, the Magen Avraham, and this is the source that we may be more familiar with. Says the Magen Avraham, Isa b'Zohar, it says in the Zohar, Shechasidim arishonim hayu ne'orim kol halayla v'oskim b'Torah. They used to stay up all night, the Chasidim Rishonim used to stay up all night learning Torah. Ukfar nahagu rov halimudim la'asot kein. And we already see that many people do this. Says the Magen Avraham, where does this come from? Ve'efshar latet tam al pi pshuto. I can give a suggestion why we do this. Where did this minhag come from? Lefi sheYisrael hayu yeshenim kol halayla. OUisrael they overslept the morning that they were meant to receive the Torah. They slept through the night. V'hutzrach HaKadosh Baruch Hu leha'ir lahem. They overslept their alarm clock, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to blow the shofar to wake them up Shavuos morning. What? That is a bad date or a bad meeting to miss. God's waiting to give you the Torah, and we all overslept. And God had to use the shofar to wake us up. So says the Magen Avraham, maybe we stay up as a tikkun, as a way of fixing that by staying up all night and ensuring that we're not going to oversleep and miss the receiving of the Torah. Okay, so this is a totally different reason. It's another approach to why we stay up all night. Now, of course, that means that you have to make sure that if you stay up all night, you're not sleeping during the davening when you receive the Torah. So you got to make sure that you're actually energetic enough and able to handle this. But that is the approach. Now, it's very interesting to note that not all Mefarshim agree with this analysis of OUisrael oversleeping. If you look at source number 4, this is an interesting Eben Ezra that not everyone is aware of. Says the Eben Ezra, the pasuk had said, "V'heyu nichonim," you should be ready for the next day. Says the Eben Ezra, "Ulai lo yishan adam bahem balayla." Maybe we can suggest that no one went to sleep that night. Sheyishma'u kol Hashem baboker, so that they would hear and make sure that they would be up for when Hashem came that morning. Kederech kohen gadol biyom haKippurim. And he compares it to what the Kohen Gadol used to have the minhag to do every Yom Kippur night. Anyone who has, if we've learned or you've gone through the Avoda or learned the Mishnayot in Masechet Yoma, we know that the Kohen Gadol every single year would stay up all night on Yom Kippur. He would learn halachot. They had people there to help kind of snap him out of it. If he ever got tired, he would put his feet on the cold floor. They had different ways to keep him up, but he was kept up the entire night. And says the Eben Ezra, maybe that's what OUisrael did that night. In which case, obviously, that's arguing on the analysis of the Magen Avraham, but it might lend a new reason to why we stay up all night. Why do we stay up all night on Shavuot night? Not as a tikkun for what OUisrael did, but to commemorate what OUisrael did. Just like they stayed up all night before they received the Torah, so too we try to relive that experience by staying up all night. Yes, I think I saw a question, or I thought I saw a question. Yeah.
That's actually where we receive the Shniyot, the way we receive.
On Yom Kippur, yeah, interesting. That is true. That's true. Oh, no, well, we received the first. Well, that's true. We were given the Aseret HaDibrot. We received the Aseret HaDibrot. I think that's meaning we didn't receive the actual physical luchot. We didn't receive the actual luchot, but we received. God gave us the actual. Yes, but God / Moshe told us the Ten Commandments, and it's that revelation. But yes, you're right. The actual luchot themselves we didn't receive till later on. But yeah, that's very, very, very interesting. Okay, so we have a few different reasons for why we stay up. The two main reasons that are suggested, the main approaches. One is that OUisrael adorn themselves with the beauty of the Torah as they prepare to enter their marriage with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the other reason is as a tikkun in order to fix the mistake that Bnei Yisrael made the morning of Matan Torah, that they overslept, and we stay up in order to show that we're not going to oversleep. I wonder if we can suggest, again, I haven't seen this written explicitly, but we noted that there were two different ways that people do Tikkun Leil Shavuot. One is the Sephardic minhag is to read a specific text, is to go through what we call kol haTorah kula, whereas the more Ashkenazic tradition is you learn whatever you want. You learn b'chavrusa, you go to a shir. I often learn with my children. Whatever is meaningful, meaning there's no specific text. In the classic Ashkenazic communities, there's no specific text. The idea is to spend that time learning Torah. It doesn't matter specifically what you learn as long as you're involving yourself in the learning somewhat. I wonder if those two minhagim are connected to the two different reasons. That if this is about adorning yourself with the Torah as you prepare to enter marriage, then it would be most appropriate. And in fact, that's what the Rashbi talks about, how you should read all of the Torah. You should attempt to go through kol haTorah kula because you want to adorn yourself with all of the Torah, all of the different garments, or all of the different things that you have in order to be able to enter the marriage. Where if it's just about staying up in order to do a tikkun for what OUisrael, the mistake OUisrael made, as long as you stay up learning, it doesn't matter whether you're learning all of the Torah or you're just learning specific things. So that's just an idea. But I wanted to share with you one other suggestion for perhaps why we stay up. And this I heard from one of my teachers a number of years ago, why we stay up all night. I remember one of my friends when I was in yeshiva did a calculation. And he calculated, and this guy was, the smart guy in the yeshiva. He said, if I don't stay up all night and I wake up in the morning and I learn every minute from the time I wake up until the end of Shavuot, I'll end up learning more than if I stayed up all night and then go to sleep. So he thought he outsmarted the system, right? He said, you think that we're staying up all night to learn as much as we can. If I don't stay up all night, and the answer was that's not what it was about. It's not as much about how many minutes of Torah you're learning. It's about the experience of staying up all night learning Torah. When a person is in a specific, cares about something or is dedicated to something, sometimes you do things that make no sense. Staying up all night to learn Torah does not make a lot of sense, right? It's not what logical, most people don't stay up all night to do the things that they're interested in. But once a year, we show our commitment to the Torah. We show our love for Hashem and His Torah. And we do something, okay, it could be that we have to take extra breaks. It could be we have to drink a lot more coffee. It could be that in terms of actual numbers, we're not going to learn as much as we would had we gotten up in the morning and learned Shavuot day. But that's not what this is about. This is about showing our connection, our love for Hashem and for His Torah. And therefore, we're going to do something when the rest of the world is sleeping. We're going to do something a little bit different. When you're in love, you do things that are a little bit crazy. You do things that you wouldn't normally do. And this is how we show our commitment to Hashem, by staying up all night and learning Torah. So that's just another idea to consider. Yes, please.
Is it related to the rabbi staying up all night in the Haggadah?
And the rabbis who were so busy who stayed up all night in order to do Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and they didn't even realize what it was. Yes. So the truth is that there is a concept also in the halacha, the idea of staying up all night to tell the story of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. That there is this idea of staying up all night to tell the story of the Exodus, meaning that what that story shows is that there is no limit to how much a person is supposed to tell the story. When we say how much do I need to tell the story, so there's the minimum, which is the Haggadah, and the maximum is as much as you can. And yes, there is an idea. I think that is part of the idea. Is we're so thankful and appreciative to God for what He did, and it's so important to us to pass down the tradition of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim that I agree. Yes, I think that's part of the idea. Yes.
Question. Is it actually written in the Torah that there is when OUisrael overslept?
No.
Or that they
It is not written. It does not say explicitly in the Torah that OUisrael overslept. All it says is that in the beginning, it says that God blew the shofar. No, it does not say it explicitly in the Torah. It is based on certain hints or certain readings of the Torah. The Torah does not explicitly say it. The Ibn Ezra argues on it. We know that it's not explicitly written in the Torah. It was just a suggestion that was made, and I don't know if it's forgive me, I don't remember if it's a specific midrash or if it was just an analysis on some of the commentaries. But they derive it from certain reading of the psukim. But it's not written explicitly in the Torah. Okay, perhaps the minhag that has the preponderance of suggestions and explanations is the minhag to eat dairy. Now, I think that's probably because we as Jews love to eat, and anything we can in order to be able to justify eating more and eating more delicious foods, that's probably what we're going to be very good at. But there's a number of fascinating suggestions to why there is a minhag to eat dairy. The first one I'd like to give you, this is the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, in source number 6, makes the following suggestion. He says, why do we eat dairy on Shavuot? V'nahagu b'kol makom le'echol ma'achalei chalav b'yom harishon shel Shavuot. We have the minhag to eat dairy products on the first day of Shavuot. Now, don't forget, why is he saying the first day of Shavuot? Because he's in Chutz La'aretz, where they had 2 days. We, Baruch Hashem, have returned to our homeland, to Eretz Yisrael. We only have 1 day, which means we have to pack everything into that 1 day. On the one hand, we only have 1 day. On the other hand, we have to pack it all in. Okay, so he says, V'nira li hata'am. What's the reason? Shehu kimo shnei tavshilim shelokchim belel Pesach. Just like on Leil Pesach, we take the egg and we take the shenkbod, zecher lePesach, v'zecher lechagiga. Right, on our Seder plate on Pesach, we have 2 different foods. One commemorates the Korban Pesach, and one commemorates the Korban Chagiga of Pesach. He says the same thing is true of eating dairy on Shavuot. Why? Ken ochlim ma'achal chalav, ve'achar kach ma'achal basar, v'tzvichim lavi imahem beit lechem ala shulchan, shehu b'mkom ha'mizbeach, v'yesh bazeh zichron lebeiz halechem shayu makrivim b'yom ha'bikurim. Excuse me. So too, he says, the minhag is to eat dairy and then to eat meat. By the way, for those of you, we talked about eating a lot. So there are families who do this, many families just have dairy on Shavuot, but some families actually in their meal have dairy, and then they fold up the meal and they actually have meat as well. Now, of course, you have to be very careful not to mix milk and meat, and the only way to do this is if you do milk before meat. But what's the reason? Is because on Shavuot they would bring the shtei halechem. There was a special korban that was brought of 2 loaves of bread. And in order to commemorate the 2 loaves of bread, we eat dairy with some bread, and then we eat meat with some bread, and that's how we commemorate the shtei halechem. So that's one suggestion. But there are a number of very other creative ones that I'd like to share with you, which I thought were very, very fascinating. Look at source number 7, the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura, in his commentary on that Shulchan Aruch, brings a very interesting suggestion. V'ani shamati od b'shem gadol acher. I heard another reason. She'amar ta'am nachon lazeh, who gave a very good reason for why we eat dairy. Be'et she'amdu al har Sinai v'kiblu et HaTorah. When OUisrael received the Torah. So now all of a sudden, this is a nation that went from not having many, many commandments and many halachot to all of a sudden, right after Matan Torah, we're commanded to keep many various halachot. V'yardu min hahar. All of a sudden, they went back to their houses. Lebeitam lo matzu ma le'echol. They had nothing to eat. Why did they have nothing to eat? They can no longer eat meat right away. Why couldn't they eat meat right away? Because now they're commanded to do shchita. Now they're commanded to slaughter the animals. It's very complicated to do shchita. And all their kalim, they had to kosher all their kalim because all their kalim were no longer. So therefore, what was the easiest thing to eat at the time right after Matan Torah? Dairy. Dairy was the easiest thing to eat. I guess they had some cows. I don't know where they got it from, or the goat. They got milk from somewhere. So to commemorate the fact that they ate dairy at Matan Torah right after Matan Torah, therefore we have the minhag to eat dairy. I thought that was very interesting, very creative. Of course, that's under the assumption. There's one big assumption there, which is that OUisrael became obligated in all the various halachot right after Matan Torah. I don't know if it's clear when they were taught all the various halachot, but this is at least one approach to which was that they were taught many of the halachot, or if not all of them, right at the moment of revelation. And then they went home and they needed something to eat, and this is what they ate. If you look at source number 8, another very creative suggestion. This is the Medrash in Tehillim. The Medrash in Tehillim points out that the reason we eat chalav is because the whole argument of basar and chalav, of not eating milk and meat, is something which was fundamental to OUisrael receiving the Torah. How so? Look at source number 8. Actually, this is the Medrash is bringing the end of a conversation that God had with the Malachim. The Medrash tells us that when God was about to give the Torah to OUisrael, the angels approached God and said, why are you giving it to them? They're humans. They're going to make mistakes. They're not going to listen to you. They rebel against you. Keep it up here. If you keep your Torah up here, you'll make sure that everything is going to stay pristine. Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now let's look at source number 8. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the angels, B'chol yom hayitem katigorim beini levein Yisrael. Every day you're challenging and you're accusing OUisrael of not keeping the mitzvot, of not doing what they're supposed to. Lo atem kishiyaraditem eitzel Avraham achaltem basar v'chalav. You, the angels, when the 3 angels went to Avraham Avinu, they went to Avram Avinu. Avram served them. If you look at the Psukim, it tells us that Avram served them meat. He served them from the cows, and he also made butter, which means he served them basar v'chalav. You guys ate basar v'chalav. Shene'emar vayikach chema v'chalev be'uven habakar vayochlu. V'tinok shelahem kishehu babi beis rabo v'imono tenet lo pas ubasar v'gvina lechol Harehu Omer la Hayom Lamdeni Rebbe Lo Tivashel Gediba Chalev Imo. They said, you guys ate basar v'chalav, but every 3-year-old child knows when he comes home from Gan, if his mother tries to give him milk together with his meat, he turns to his mother and says, but I learned that we're not allowed to do this. Lo matzu lo ma'aneh. And the angels couldn't respond to this. They couldn't respond to this accusation that OUisrael were totally involved and understood the Torah, and yet these angels didn't listen. Be'oto sha'a amar hakadosh baruch hu kitov lecha tadvarim ha'ela ad she'en lahem ma'aneh v'tshuva. So then God turned to Moshe and said, quick, Moshe, write down the Torah before the angels come up with this with a better answer. And so part of the reason, according to Chazal, why we were privileged with the mitzvah, or with receiving the Torah, was because due to the complication of basar v'chalav, we were able to receive the Torah. In order to show that, we therefore eat dairy on Shavuot. And source number 9, the Sefer Minhagim brings another source, which is just a Rashi Tevot. The pasuk says when it's describing b'Shavuot techem b'Shavuot ochlin chalav v'zecher remez the ta'amei haTorah shene'emar mincha chadasha laHashem b'Shavuot techem. If you look at the first letters of each of the words chadasha laHashem b'Shavuot techem, it spells out chalav. So you have a hint to the idea of that we eat chalav on Shavuot. One other reason that I wanted to share with you, which again is a fascinating one that I heard. I couldn't find it written, but I've heard it in the past. Is that one of the reasons is that we're connecting somehow to that, and we'll share this. We'll talk about this in detail in a little bit. We're connecting to the Pesach story. In order to remind ourselves, because Moshe Rabbeinu, when Batya found Moshe Rabbeinu, and in the Nile River, and the Chazal tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu refused to nurse from the Egyptian women, and there, as a result of that, then Miriam came and paired him up with Yocheved, and he was able to then continue to nurse from his mother Yocheved. And in order to commemorate the fact that he refused to nurse from the non-Jewish women, therefore we eat dairy, we eat milk on Shavuot. Now that's an interesting, I want to get back to that soon, because we're going to see that some of the Mefarshim connect other Minhagim on Shavuot to Pesach, and the question is, why are we talking about Pesach on Shavuot? I'd like to talk about that soon. Okay, now those are 2 minhagim. So far we've done the minhag of staying up all night. We've done the minhag of dairy on Shavuot. The third minhag, which maybe some of you are familiar with, is flowers and greenery. There is a minhag to adorn the shul, to put different flowers before Shavuot. If not flowers, then plants, and to decorate the shul in these flowers and plants. Now where does this come from? So the Levush in source number 10. V'nohagim l'shtoach eitzim b'yom tov d'Shavuot b'beit knesset u'v'vatim zecher l'simchat matan Torah. It commemorates the happiness and the simcha that we had when we received the Torah. Shehayu asavim saviv Har Sinai, because Har Sinai was decorated, according to Chazal, with flowers, and in order to commemorate that it was adorned with flowers, therefore we adorn our shuls with flowers and plants. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, Gam hatzon v'abakar al yiru. Why does it specifically say that the animals shouldn't come close or shouldn't pasture, but right by Har Sinai? Shema mina shahaya sham mar'eh. It must be that there were plants and flowers there that the animals would have wanted to pasture with, and we were told not to let our animals go there. So we learn from there that Har Sinai was adorned with flowers and plants, etc. And in order to commemorate that, we adorn our shuls. Another reason that's given actually by the Magen Avram, which is a totally different reason, is the following. In source number 11, Nohagin laha'amid ilanot b'veit hakneset. We put trees or plants in the shul, uvabatim, in our houses. V'nira li hata'am sheyaskiru shebe'atzeret nidonim al peirot. It reminds us of the fact that on Shavuot we're actually judged for the kinds of fruits and produce that are going to grow. There are different times of the Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah tells us that there are different times of the year when we are judged for different things. For example, we know that on Sukkot, Nidonim al Hamayim, we're judged for water. And Rosh Hashanah, we're judged as individuals. And one of the judgments we have is that on Atzeret, which is known as Shavuot, we're judged for the peirot, for the fruit that are going to grow that year. And therefore, to commemorate that, to remind ourselves of that fact, because it's not something we think about a lot, therefore we adorn the shul with different things. Now, there are some sources that actually say that we should not do this. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon, was known to say that this was a minhag that he didn't think was appropriate, because he felt that this was a minhag. The minhag of putting flowers in your sanctuary was something that other religions did, and it was too similar to other religions. And therefore, there are many shuls who don't do this nowadays. My memory serves me correctly. In my shul in America, they definitely used to have very beautiful flowers, and I think even I live now in Shalavim in a kibbutz. They don't put flowers; they actually just take like big leaves and they literally hang them up around the shul. I think that's much more Israeli. In America, they have like these fancy bouquets, and then in Israel, they're like hanging up palm tree branches. You have things of wheat. Okay, so I think if I remember correctly, my shul like just takes branches of palm trees and like tapes them and puts them all around the shul. Again, based on the different reasons. Either it's because of the adornment of Har Sinai, or it's to remind us that Shavuot is a time when we are being judged on fruit. But there's another explanation that is given for this, which again harkens back to Pesach, and this explanation points out that Shavuot happens to be that around the time when Moshe Rabbeinu, as a baby, was put into the Yaor, into the Nile. And how do we know that? Because if we remember, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was born on Zayin Adar. Right? He was born and he passed away both on Zayin Adar, on the 7th of Adar. And the Torah tells us that for 3 months his mother hid him in, because she tried to hide him after he was born. If you calculate 3 months later, it comes out to the 7th of Sivan. Okay, so which means that around this time is when Moshe Rabbeinu was actually taken from his home, put into the Yaor, and then the whole story as we know it. Now, how is this connected to the greenery? So this explanation suggests the reason why we do this is because when Moshe was placed into the Nile, it tells us that he was placed and surrounded by reeds. And it tells us that Miriam hid on the side behind the reeds to see what was going on. And therefore, the suggestion is made that that's why we put reeds around our shul. Again, I want to get back to, hopefully soon, why all of a sudden on Shavuot are we hearkening back to Pesach, something to think about. Okay, we have only a couple of more minhagim that I'd like to go through, and then to kind of bring this all together. Megillat Rut. Megillat Rut is again another minhag that many of us are familiar with, something that we all know. But again, remember, this is a minhag. All of these things are customs that developed later on. There is no mitzvah that was commanded of us on Shavuot specifically. Everything we do on Shavuot all develops from minhagim. Look at source number 13. Why do we read Megillat Rut? Again, a number of different answers. V'gam b'chag Shavuot nahagu likrot Rut. Why? Mipnei shekatuv bo, because the very beginning of it, it says vayehi b'tchilat kitzir chitim. It was at the time of the harvesting of the chitim. V'huzman hakatzir. Shavuot is the chag hakatzir. It is the chag that is the chag of the harvest. V'od tam. What's another reason? Acher lefi she'avotenu lo kiblu et haTorah v'lo nichnesu lebrit. Ela b'milah v'tvila v'hartzaat damim ki de'isa b'perek hacholetz v'rut gam hi nitga'ira shene'emar ki el asher telchi elech. This, I think, is a very important answer. Another reason why we read Rut on Shavuot is because Rut is the quintessential Gioret. She is the classic Jewish convert. She chose to join. She dedicated herself to Naomi, her mother-in-law. And why do we read that on Shavuot? Because Shavuot reminds us that fundamentally, we're all converts. The entire Jewish nation had to go through a process of milah, tvila, of preparing, going to the mikveh, preparing before Matan Torah. If the boys had not had the milah, they had to do a brit milah. That same process that every ger or gioris goes through in their conversion process, we as a nation had to go through as well. And therefore, when we talk about conversions, we talk about converts, how we're supposed to, right? The Torah is very clear about how we're supposed to treat converts. We're supposed to be very kind, extra kind to converts. Now, I'm not going to get into this right now, but there's often a certain association with conversions, because there's a certain halakha about how we're supposed to approach a convert when a convert comes to us, and there's a certain understanding that we're supposed to initially perhaps push them away in order to ensure that they're dedicated and really want to convert. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't treat converts appropriately. Hafuch, we're supposed to treat them in a very special way. And what reminds us of that? What helps highlight that for us? The recognition and the understanding that fundamentally all of OUisrael were really converts. If somebody left Mitzrayim with the nation, but wasn't at Matan Torah and didn't go through the process needed to prepare himself for Matan Torah, he wasn't Jewish. It was nothing automatic that if you left Egypt, you were automatically. You had to be a part, you had to leave Egypt and be there at Matan Torah and go through the preparation process. And because, in order to highlight that, we read specifically Megillat Ruth on Shavuot, the celebration of the Torah. Yes?
That's the idea of Torah, the whole world is.
Absolutely. She mean that's why we talk about why we read Ruth? Yeah, of course. That's another suggestion. We're going to see that. We're going to see that very, very soon. 100%. There are other reasons why we read Megillat Ruth. This is just two of them. The next reason, another reason, source number 14. We're going to get to, yes, what you're suggesting, of course, is certainly there. I didn't bring the source for that, but yes. If you look at source number 14, Ma inyan Ruth etel atzeret. Why do we read Ruth etel right by Shavuot? Shenikreit ba'atzeret bizman matan Torah. Why do we read it at the same time that we commemorate receiving the Torah? Lilamedcha shelo natna Torah ela al yedei yisurin ve'oni. That living a life of Torah can often come through challenges and travails and tribulations. Just like Ruth and Orpah and Naomi lived at the beginning, certainly for much of their life with many different challenges, so too living a life of Torah often requires us to live through a certain amount of challenges. And this is something that we all understand and are experiencing now. Due to the situation, the current security situation in Eretz Yisrael, where on the one hand, I'm sure I speak for most, if not all of us, there's no other place we'd rather be. But on the other hand, we are certainly a nation in pain, and that is part of living a life of Torah, is recognition that sometimes that comes with certain sacrifices and challenges. And Megillat Ruth, according to the Yalkut Shimoni, highlights that as well. Shari Tshuva in source number 16 gives one other suggestion, and he said, I'll just say it outside. Why do we read Ruth on Shavuot? Because according to Chazal, David HaMelech was born and died on Shavuot. And as we know, who did David HaMelech come from? From Ruth and Boaz. And as at the end of Megillat Ruth, it lists the lineage, and ultimately all the way getting to David HaMelech. And in order to show that even the king, and ultimately the Mashiach, comes from Ruth and Boaz, and therefore we read that story on Shavuot as well. Please.
It's always saying here, Atzeres. Is it really ever written in the Torah?
The Torah, yes, the Torah does refer to Shavuos as Atzeres. I don't remember which specific psukim. I apologize, but I'm happy to look at it. It's a good question. I will look at it again. But my recollection is that yes.
But I don't.
No, so it's a good point. My recollection is yes. I don't remember it offhand, so it could be I'm mistaken. But I seem to recall that it is. We can look at it. I'm happy to explore it. Thank you. And I'm happy to. I could be wrong. My recollection is that it is called Atzeres in the Torah. That is one of the only names that's given in the Torah is Atzeres. But I'm happy to look that up, and it could be I'm wrong. Okay, now two other minhagim that I wanted to get to. One is the minhag, we'll say this outside, is the minhag to read the Aseret HaDibrot, to read the Ten Commandments in a special trup, in a special cantillation. Those of us who have paid attention or who are Balei Kriya may be familiar with the fact that there are two different ways that the Aseret HaDibrot could be read. One is called Ta'am Elyon, and one is called Ta'am Tachton. It's a different trup, it's a different tune, and it also divides up the actual Ten Commandments in different ways. Usually, generally, the minhag, when we read the parshiot of the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, on the classic during the year, we read what's called Tam Tachton. We read the regular trup, the regular cantillation. But on Shavuot, many shuls have the custom to read it in a different tune. Why? So we're not going to see it inside, but the Chizkuni suggests that's because on Shavuot we're trying to recreate the receiving of the Torah and the revelation that we have from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in order to show that, we read the Aseret HaDibrot differently, in order to show that we're now recreating the moment of revelation. So that's just another minhag that not all shuls do it. Some shuls specifically don't, because there's a whole question whether it'll make it seem like that you shouldn't read one section different than the other, because it'll imply that one section of the Torah is better than the other. All words and all letters in the Torah are very, very important. But this is a minhag that is mentioned, which many shuls do have, to read the Aseret HaDibrot specifically on Shavuot in a different cantillation. Yes. You mean is there a historical in terms of this specific minhag? All of these different minhagim. Good. I want to highlight that. I want to get to that soon. So hold that off for a second. Listen, all of these different minhagim are clearly come from different sources in different places. And I'm not historically going through which communities they came from, which communities they didn't come from. The one that's listed in the Zohar obviously comes from a much earlier source. Some of them come from later sources. Whether or not, culturally and sociologically, some came from different areas, different parts of the country, it's a very good question. I'm not familiar, I don't have as much of, a cultural and sociological background to be able to explain the different cultures and where they all came from. But it is interesting to see the different minhagim that are developing. The last minhag, which is, as I mentioned, and I mentioned facetiously, is our favorite, is the akdamot. Akdamot, for those of us who are familiar with this, is what happens is right before they read the Torah on Shavuot morning, the Kohen is called up. The Kohen, before he says the bracha, he then reads what's basically a piyut. It's almost a poem describing the beauty of Hashem and His Torah. And it's something that many people aren't familiar with, and they almost don't expect. And it can be confusing because you're like, well, what are they reading the Torah? Are they not reading the Torah? In fact, we're not going to go through this now, but historically, they used to read it as part of the laning, meaning the Kohen used to say the bracha for the Torah. They would read one pasuk from the Torah, and then they would stop, pause in the middle, and then read the akdamot. Contemporary times, they stopped doing that. Why? Because they were afraid it would be confusing. It's not mechubad to read a pasuk from the Torah and then start reading from something outside the Torah. People wouldn't know what's written in the Torah, what's not. And therefore, the minhag is the Kohen comes up, he reads this beautiful piyut and poem, and then he makes the bracha on the Birkot HaTorah, and then he lanes, and then the Balkori lanes. Now, what I wanted to highlight though is where this comes from. Where did this piyut come from? So I brought for you here an excerpt from a wonderful sefer called Sefer HaToda'ah, the book of Jewish heritage by Rabbi Eliyahu Kitov. It's one of those fundamental books that really outlines various minhagim in Jewish communities. And I think this is actually very important. And to me, when I read this section, it really highlighted for me how even in contemporary times, this is maybe something that we should be paying more attention to. Because many of us are kind of spacing out during this time, and I think specifically in the times that we're living in, we should be paying more attention to akdamot. So look at source number 31. The piyut akdamot was composed by Rabbi Meir, the son of Rabbi Yitzchak, who was the chazan of the city of Worms. The sainted Rashi was a resident of Worms, and the tradition relates that Rabbi Meir was Rashi's teacher. The son of the author was slain for the sanctification of God's name during the crusade of 1906. And he too sanctified the name of heaven. 1096. Thank you, you're right. It was not 1906. Thank you. That's a typo. Thank you. And he sanctified the name of heaven in a debate with priests, which was forced upon him. In the debate, the priest attempted to persuade him to forsake his faith and to accept theirs. He answered appropriately and scorned them. He spoke to them in strength and clarity of the Creator's power, of his love for Israel, and the excellence of Torah and the reward harbored for its devotees. The sainted author did not live long after the debate, but he left as a blessed legacy this piyut, akdamot, in praise of the Creator, the Torah, and Israel. In generations of annihilation and forced conversion, when a sharp sword rested on Israel's throat, sorry for all the typos, I have to fix these, and its enemies kindled conflagration of fire everywhere, to burn Israel alive for steadfastly adhering to its faith in the living God, afflicted and persecuted Israel found encouragement and strength in this song. When it was sung in their ears, they derived the strength to withstand their enemies. Because of the excellence of the song and the saintliness of its author, the custom arose of chanting it in the middle of the Torah reading during the festival of Shavuot. The Kohen ascended to the Torah and recited the bracha. The first verse from the prescribed Torah reading for the day was read. The Torah reading was interrupted for the chanting of akdamot and was resumed upon its conclusion. The people were thereby taught the extent of sanctifying God's name. That the Torah is only ours if we adhere to it, even at the cost of our lives. That the sanctification of God's name is the very essence of Torah. In recent generations, a number of outstanding Gaonim cast criticism upon the custom of interrupting the Torah reading for the recitation of akdamot. The custom was finally established to call the Kohen to the Torah, to open the Torah scroll and place its covering upon it, and then to chant akdamot before the recitation of the bracha. And so the history of akdamot is meant to give strength and power to the concept that sometimes living a life of Avodat Hashem and living a life of Kiddush Hashem requires us to sacrifice our lives and to sacrifice the things that are close to us. I can think of nothing more appropriate to be thinking about on Shavuot, especially during the years that we're in right now, when so many Giborim are giving of their own lives, Al Kiddush Hashem, and so many families are living with the reality of having a life that is different and has been forever changed due to the war that we're in. To me, akdamot is something we should specifically be thinking about and focusing on, to give us and to give all of Am Yisrael the chizuk that is needed to recognize that sometimes living a life of Avodat Hashem and living a life of Kiddush Hashem requires, although we don't ask to have to give that ultimate sacrifice, it is something that we as a nation sometimes have to do. And so what we've seen so far is a whole lot of minhagim, a whole lot of different customs, a whole lot of different minhagim for all the things that we do on Shavuot. And in fact, if we think about it, there were a couple of themes that really carried on throughout all the different minhagim. One theme that I think we saw throughout many of the minhagim was the concept of recreating Matan Torah, recognizing that Shavuot is the day when we receive the Torah, and that's why we put the flowers, and that's why we stay up all night, and we eat dairy because that's what they ate right after Matan Torah, right? So we saw that there was one theme that really passed through all the minhagim was the concept of recreating Matan Torah. Another theme that we saw in a couple of places was hearkening back to Pesach, was doing things that remind us of Pesach. Now, why would we be remembering Pesach on Shavuot? So perhaps the suggestion is, and we've discussed this in the past, we have to remember that Pesach and Shavuot are not two totally independent chagim. They're actually intimately connected. So, in fact, according to some opinions, Shavuot is really just the end of Pesach, connected through what? Sfirat HaOmer. Pesach, then Sfirat HaOmer and Shavuot. And perhaps we're reminding ourselves that before we received the Torah, we had to become a nation through Yetziat Mitzrayim. Yetziat Mitzrayim, Pesach and Shavuot are interconnected and can never be separated. And that might be why even on Shavuot, we're doing various minhagim that remind us of the story of Pesach, because the two chagim are not two independent chagim, but they're very much interconnected. But we started with a question, and the question we started with at the very beginning was why? Why is it that Shavuot is the one chag that is dominated by minhagim? It's the one chag where, if you ask people their associations of the chag, what do they talk about? Minhagim. The question is why. And I'd like to answer that question, read with you a beautiful idea by Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who was the Rosh Yeshivat Har Etzion. I had the privilege of studying by him in the Grus Kollel and YU's Kollel for a couple of years. And he developed an idea that I think is important to help us understand this, to answer this question. Source number 19. It is well known that although we refer to Shavuot in our prayers as Zman Matan Toratenu, the Torah itself associates Shavuot, we're in source number 19, only with the barley harvest and not with any historical event. Is there any connection between the agricultural holiday of Chag HaKatzir and the spiritual commemoration of Zman Matan Toratenu? Although it is possible that the linkage is arbitrary, the Torah happened to have been given in the same season as the beginning of the harvest, it seems much more likely that the two are connected. In the two above-mentioned Parshiot and Shemot, the time of Katzir, when Shavuot falls, is contrasted with the time of Asif, indicating the holiday of Sukkot. What is the difference between Katzir, harvesting, and Asif, gathering? Katzir is the first point in the agricultural process at which some sort of usable item emerges from the field. At this stage, the grain has developed to a point where it can begin its humanly controlled process. However, it is still far from being a finished product. At the time of harvest, much potential has yet to be realized before the time of the ingathering. The same principle could be applied to the giving of the Torah. At Sinai, the Jewish people received the word of God, a code to live by. God gave them an objective, a set text, the Torah Shebichtav, as well as a set of principles, traditions, and explanations in Torah Shebal Peh, which require human input. God gave, so to speak, an unfinished gift. Through faithful transmission of the Masorah, as well as intense and creative study of it, the relatively amorphous oral law would take form. The Beit HaLevi explains, the written Torah now is identical to the one given at Har Sinai. One may not add anything to it. If a Torah scroll has one extra letter, it is disqualified, just as if it were missing a letter. The written Torah was given in a set form to which you cannot add and from which you cannot detract. However, the oral law has no bounds or limits, and in every generation new laws are developed. Each time a person touches it, he discovers a new insight which was previously unknown. The demand to develop the Torah Shebal Peh is not placed upon a single generation or a single individual, but rather upon the entire Jewish people for all time. Thus, at Sinai, and this is the important piece, God set before the people both the objective text, the raw material of the grain, and the requirement to develop the oral law to its fullest potential, the obligation of every Jew. Says Rav Lichtenstein, what we're celebrating on Chag Shavuot is not just that God gave us a book of halacha and we just do it. God gave us, as it were, the grain, harvested it, but it's now up to us to continue to cultivate it and to develop it. The fact that Matan Torah occurred on Chag HaKatzir shows us that the Torah is not a finished product. Obviously, there are rules. Obviously, there are ways. Not any person can come in and just decide what the Torah is. But the Torah requires a human input. It requires development through the oral law in order to develop. And in order to show that the Torah was not given as a finished product, but was rather part of a huge corpus that we call oral law. Therefore, God gave it on Chag HaKatzir when it wasn't yet the time for the finished product to be brought into the home, to highlight the human involvement in the development of Torah. Perhaps we can suggest that why on Shavuot are we focusing specifically on Minhagim? Because one of the things that highlights more than anything the contribution of the human element to our religious experience are the various customs that we have gotten from various cultures and communities throughout the world. And it's specifically on this day when we receive the Torah, we remind ourselves that it's not just the Torah Shebechtav that we receive from God, but that we are partners, we as human beings, we as a people are partnering with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in developing the Torah and applying it to the modern times. And the feel and culture of our lives is something that develops actively through the communities and the minhagim that we develop. And perhaps that is why specifically on Shavuot there is no specific mitzvah, but rather the entire Chag it revolves around the various minhagim, the various customs that we have, in order to highlight our involvement in the development of Jewish life and development of Jewish culture. Okay, we did a lot. I'm gonna end. I'll take a question after just because I want to make sure that everyone has a break. I'm sorry, I can't take, I'm happy to answer questions, but I want to dismiss everyone so you have a few minute break before the next slot. Just also a quick reminder, if anybody is interested to hear more about this bar and bat mitzvah that's happening on Thursday, you can come to me. I'm happy to share with you. Wishing everybody a wonderful week and of course a Chag Sameach.